Story time about how I became obsessed with my doctor and faked a heart attack just to see him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I'm 26 years old and desperate for a husband. I come from a very antiquated family. My parents think I'm already an old maid because I haven't had kids, and that no man will ever want me because I'm too old. For the past 4 years, I've been on a mission to find a husband. I signed up to a bunch of dating apps. I went on so many dates, but still never found anyone I was compatible with, or anyone that wanted to marry me for that matter. Last year, we had a COVID scare in my family and we all went to get tested. I started feeling a little bit sick, so I went to a doctor. This doctor, let me tell you, when he walked into the room, I nearly fainted. He was the most gorgeous man I'd ever seen in my life. He was also so nice because obviously he was my doctor, but he seemed so caring. I quickly became infatuated with him and kept making up excuses to have to go see him. I even came up with this plan that I was gonna get him to fall in love with me. I told my mom and she ended up telling my dad and they thought I was completely crazy. I stalked the doctor on social media and found out that he wasn't married. He did have a girlfriend though, but this was no problem for me. I would do my makeup and dress up really nice just to go see him. But this backfired on me. He started to think that I was a hypochondriac and that I was making up all my symptoms. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I became obsessed with my doctor and even faked a heart attack just to see him. Disclaimers are not my story time. That's when he told me that I was a hypochondriac and that I was probably just imagining/faking all my symptoms. I pretended to act outraged and I said absolutely not. He told me I just needed to relax. But this is the best part. He complimented me on my hair, and that's when I convinced myself that he was in love with me. From that day on, I would follow him everywhere. Anytime he would go to buy coffee, I would end up being there, and we would just casually bump into each other. I thought he wasn't suspecting anything until one day I get home and my parents sit me down to tell me that the doctor noticed that I had been following him everywhere. And he also asked them to find me a new doctor and that he could no longer see me. I was devastated. I felt like he had broken up with me. My parents forbade me from going near his office, but this didn't stop me. I decided to go straight to his house and confess my feelings. As soon as he opened the door, I told him that I loved him and that I just wanted to have his children. He did not take this very well. He told me to leave. When I got home, my parents didn't let me out of the house for a few days. So I did what I had to do. I faked a heart attack and insisted that the only doctor I wanted to see me was him. My parents had no choice but to take me to him. That's when he told my parents that I had made everything up and that I did not have a heart attack. It's been almost a year and I'm still trying to find ways to get back into his life. I'm running out of excuses. Can you guys help me think of some? Yes, I know this is a little bit crazy, but I know that he could fall in love with me and we would be very happy. What do you think I should do? Story time about how I did the dirty with my crush's brother just to get him jealous. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I just turned 23 years old and I've been in love with the same guy for 5 years. This guy, let's call him Chad. He's always said to me that he doesn't want a girlfriend, but then he'll call me at night for, you know what? I decided to ghost him for a month just to see what would happen, but he didn't even contact me. This obviously hurt my feelings because I was totally in love with him. I would have given anything to be in a serious relationship with him, but all he wanted was to party and hang out with other girls too. He started posting other girls to his story and it made me furious. I couldn't believe that he was doing that to me, but at the same time I couldn't hold it against him. Nonetheless, I was brokenhearted. I decided to date a few guys, but nothing worked. All I kept thinking about was stupid Chad. A little backstory about Chad. He has 2 brothers, one is older and one is younger. The older one is really attractive, and he's also liked me for a very long time, but he also knows that I'm totally in love with Chad, so he never really tried to talk to me because of that. Let's call him Jake. I decided to slide into Jake's DMs, and I told him that I thought he was really hot. He replied right away. Then he said that he had always had a crush on me, but he thought that I was in love with Chad. I lied and told him that I didn't have feelings for Chad, and that I was totally free to date and see whoever I wanted. He wasted no time and asked me out on a date. We ended up having a picnic on the beach for our first date. It was actually super romantic and really nice. We spent about 6 hours at the beach, and of course, I needed to make Chad jealous, so I took pictures with Jake and posted them to my story. A minute after I posted them, Chad started messaging me. He's asking me why I'm with his brother, so I simply responded by saying that he had no right to ask me anything. Then he calls me, but I decided to ignore the call. And suddenly, Jake kissed me. He said he'd been wanting to do that for a long time, and honestly, I really liked it. Chad ended up calling me 5 times, but I ignored all of them. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I did the dirty with my crush's boyfriend just to get him jealous. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After Jake kissed me, I see I have 5 missed calls from Chad, and I pretty much ignored him the entire night. Jake took me home and nothing else happened. Next morning, I wake up to a missed call from Chad, and also a voice memo. In the voice memo, he starts telling me that he misses me and that he really wants to see me again. My plan was just to completely ignore him, but I caved. I sent him a voice memo back saying that if he wanted something serious with me, that I would totally consider it. Otherwise, I didn't want him to talk to me. He then left me on red. Yep, that's right. He ghosted me again. That's when I called Jake and asked him if he wanted to come over to my place. By the way, at this point, I don't really have feelings for Jake, and I'm totally aware that I was just using him, which I do feel bad for, but it worked. Jake came over and we ordered pizza. We sat down to watch a movie, but of course I pulled out my phone and started posting to my stories. Once again, Chad replies asking me why his brother is at my house, and that's when I really decided to ignore him. I left him on red, and boy did it feel good. Then I see a text from Chad saying I'm coming over. I didn't know what to do, so I told Jake that I needed him to leave because I had work. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I did the dirty with my crush's brother just to get him jealous. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Chad tells me that he's coming over to my place because he's super jealous. I have no choice but to tell Jake to leave. But Jake was super sweet about it and he said he totally understood. He gave me a kiss and left. Not even 2 minutes later, Chad shows up at my door. He comes in and starts asking me questions about his brother and I. Told him he had no right to be jealous or to even ask me any questions because he didn't want a relationship. Then he tried to kiss me and I couldn't resist. We started to kiss and before I knew it, we were, After it was over, I came to my senses and told him to leave. Of course, he pretended to be outraged. He told me that he couldn't believe that I was treating him this way. And that's when I said, well, you've been treating me this way for the past 5 years. He had no comeback. Once again, I asked him to leave and he did. A few hours later, I go to Chad's story and he's hanging out with 2 girls. All I could do was cry. So I knew I needed to one-up him. The following night, I go out with his brother and we do it. I posted a picture of his arm in my bed and this sent Chad into a rage. He calls me, but I ignored all the phone calls. That's when I knew I had to tell Jake to go home before Chad showed up. I pretended to feel sick and asked Jake if he could go home. Chad shows up once again to my house. He asked me if anything happened between his brother and I. And of course, I said yes. Out of nowhere, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He tells me that this whole time he's actually been in love with me, but that he couldn't see it. And that he couldn't stand the thought of me being with anyone else. I've been dating Chad for 2 months now, but he's super jealous and possessive. I basically ghosted Jake, but he didn't really say anything. I think he knew what was happening, but Chad doesn't even let us speak. I'm having second thoughts about this relationship. What should I do? Story time about how my crazy sister tried to steal my husband and my child while I was in the army. My sister and I have always been competitive our entire lives. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sent me on Instagram. Her and I actually didn't grow up together. We don't have the same mother. We actually met when we were teenagers, which is not a good time to meet your sister because you're already very insecure at that time. She was always a little bit insecure about her looks, and it got a lot worse when she met me. She was always comparing herself to me and asking my dad which one of us he thought was prettier. My dad, of course, would get really upset and tell her not to be like that, but I could tell that she was always judging me. Sometimes she would make fun of the way I dressed, and if I ever wore a tank top or a crop top, she would call me McChubby. Mind you, I am not chubby at all. And even if I was, it's still so wrong to call someone that. Fast forward 10 years later, I married the man of my dreams. We have a really good relationship and a 1-year-old. I joined the army straight out of high school, and I really love it. We finally got pregnant after 3 years of trying. I was told I was going to be stationed away for 2 months. My husband luckily has a job where he can work from home, and my mother lives really close to us, so I knew I was leaving the baby in good hands. My husband luckily supports me in everything I want to do, so he didn't have a problem with this. I would see my sister from time to time, but we never really hung out or anything, and she never really made an effort to meet our baby either. Last I'd heard, she'd been in a really bad relationship. Apparently, she even had to get a restraining order, and she had to move back home to live with my dad. When I finally ended up going overseas, my husband and I would Zoom every single day. This is when things took a dark turn. My husband told me that my sister came by one day to visit, and that she was full-on flirting with him, telling him how good-looking he is. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my sister tried to steal away my husband and my baby when I was stationed away. My husband told me that she came over and started flirting with him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sent me on Instagram. He asked me what he should do, and I told him to just act like normal. A few days later, my husband tells me that my sister comes over with a tray of lasagna, which she knows is his favorite dish. And here's the worst part. She brought a thong bikini and sat by the pool for hours. Apparently, she wanted to get a tan. Then she asked him if they could watch a movie together, but my husband made up an excuse saying that he had to get back on his laptop for work. He even took a video of her while she was lounging in the pool, and we both laughed at it. A few days after that, he tells me she comes over crying. Apparently, some guy wouldn't leave her alone, so she asked him if she could sleep over because she didn't feel safe. She decided to walk around the house in her underwear and an oversized t-shirt. But here's what really got to me. Apparently, she was making an effort to get to know the baby, so she would go out of her way to feed him and play with him. And out of nowhere, the baby calls her mama. She never made an effort to see the baby when I was there, so why was she making an effort now? Then my sister sent me a picture of my husband and the baby asleep on the couch. And she sends me another message saying, "Your husband is so beautiful." Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my sister tried to steal away my husband and my baby when I was stationed away. After she sent me the picture of my baby and my husband sleeping on the couch, I asked her what she was doing there. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sent me on Instagram. Then she had the audacity to tell me that she just wanted to help my husband out. I told her that he didn't need any help and that she could leave the house. That's when she asked me if I was insecure about her being around my husband since she's so attractive. As soon as she said that, I tried calling her, but she wouldn't answer. Then she decided to ignore my phone calls and messages for 2 days. So I called my husband and told him what she said. The first thing he did was reassure me and told me that I had nothing to worry about and that he would tell her to leave himself. I didn't want her to start any drama in front of the baby, so I told my husband to just let her stay another night. Instead, I called my dear dad, and I told him everything that she was doing. I even told my dad that he needed to go pick her up right away. My dad didn't even...
Slime everyone, this is STORYTIME. Like and subscribe to the channel, and tomorrow you will find a new iPhone 13 Pro Max under your pillow.
questioned me, he just went to get her. He knew exactly what she was like. 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from my husband laughing his head off. He tells me my dad came into the house and told her that she needed to leave with him. When she refused, my dad simply grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out of the house. And on the way out, he could hear my dad asking her what she thought she was doing. He even told her to stop